And they say there's no justice in the world. The former actor turned, in my opinion, deeply unpleasant right-wing activist Laurence Fox took 3 people through the courts after he was accused of racism. And then he suggested they were paedophiles. Not a joke, not an exaggeration. One of those was the brilliant, iconic drag queen, I would say, Crystal. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Let's just go through this extraordinary episode in the self-inflicted downfall of Laurence Fox. What the hell happened how did this all begin?
So back in October 2020, Laurence Fox criticized Sainsbury's for a tweet where they were promoting safe spaces and calling for a celebration of Black History Month and encouraging racists not to shop with them. He called this a racist practice, so I called him a racist. As a retaliation, he called me a pedophile. Believe it or not, it took 3 years to get there, but the courts decided today that me calling him a racist was not defamatory, and him calling me a pedophile was.
Just before we get, because I'm going to go through your statement, just in terms of what he said, because he said the High Court that being accused of racism was a reputation-destroying allegation and career-ending. He also, for example, in talking about this, he said, under cross-examination, I'm just reading through the Guardian report, Fox suggested there were contexts in which the phrase, "I hate black people," was not racist. He said, if a man is just released from a Ugandan jail where he's been gang raped by several men and he walks out and he goes, "I hate black people," it's sort of an understandable response. Asked whether it was racist to say black people in the UK should go home, Fox replied, depends on what context. Just trying to work out what his legal team thought when he was saying the word.
I have to say that watching him on the stand for 3 days talk in circles like that, it was one of the most troubling and bizarre experiences of my life. The man is obsessed with creating a very narrow definition of what it is to be a racist, and his only definition that he accepts is that racists are overtly hostile towards people based on the color of their skin, and that's the only narrow definition he's willing to accept. And so therefore he's unwilling to accept the idea that someone saying "I hate black people" is always racist, because he knows he's probably said something that people would find racist, and he needs to give himself wiggle room. It was watching him on the stand was really bizarre, because it was just a litany of all of the things that he's done in the past that people have rightfully called racist, and him finding ways to wiggle out of it, and denying the existence of white privilege, which we've seen him do in the past, using the N-word on the stand because he's allowed to, because he's just quoting his favorite lyrics, using the glass of milk emoji, which is a white power symbol. The list went on and on and on, and he just constantly obfuscated and avoided actually facing any of the actual repercussions of what he'd done. He was his favorite line and throughout it all was that I can't possibly be held responsible for how people interpret what I say. It's not my fault if people think what I'm doing is racist. I know I'm not a racist, and what I'm saying isn't racist. So if someone gets that impression from something I've said, that's on them, not on me. And it's this very bizarre way of viewing the world, where it's like speaking into the void, and he just thinks everything he says has no consequences.
I mean, obviously a lot of people, including myself, are like, whoop, whoop, great, this is amazing, all the rest of it. But I mean, to be clear, this was actually a very stressful experience, and there's nothing funny about what happened, because he threw back, obviously, the entirely false and defamatory suggestion you were paedophiles as retaliation for you describing him as for what he's done as his racism. And as you write in your statement, I've said it before, but paedophilia is one of the oldest and most damaging homophobic tropes. Since Mr. Fox used that word about me, I have been relabeled as such dozens of times, been physically threatened, and been afraid for my safety in public. This judgment unequivocally states that his tweet was defamatory and that it caused me harm. I mean, this is the point, as queer person to queer person, for those who aren't aware or should be aware. But being the idea paedophilia being linked to those who are queer people is, as you say, one of the oldest and most damaging and dangerous tropes because it actually endangers our safety. So actually, I mean, this is this is an extremely stressful thing for you to have gone through, and important given what he was, that context.
And the judge was really clear to point out that this was the first time this had ever happened to me, but since then it's happened multiple times, and there've been flare-ups of this. He started something with me that couldn't be undone, and the fact that he then never issued a meaningful apology, never retracted it in any meaningful way, and only showed remorse, frankly, once we got into the courtroom, when he was kind of forced to apologize in person and admit that he hadn't meant it. It was really, really bizarre to watch, and his whole point is that no one believed it. No one thought he was making a serious point. But I've got the receipts to show all of the people who did believe it, or at least believed it enough to send me threatening emails, to send me threatening tweets. And it was horrible. It was scary. It was unpleasant. And doubly so, like you say, because I'm a gay man, but also because I'm a drag artist. So that is another area. It's another profession that's been somehow linked in the minds of the far right to grooming of children. And it's kind of doubly defamatory because I work in that profession, which the judge also was very clear to point out that, the reputational risk I suffered was great because I do work with children. I do drag story times. I'm in the public eye. There's so many ways in which this could really hurt me.
And he's actually been involved in protests against drag story time. So actually, it's not even, there is that context, isn't there, in terms of his own politics, and the fact not just you're gay, but you're a drag queen as well.
Absolutely. And he maintained that he didn't know I was a gay man when he said that about me, which is just bollocks, because he happened to do it to two gay men. And then when people started saying, wow, you're going to go around calling gay men pedophiles, that's probably not going to go very well for you in a court of law. He then did it a third time against Nicola Thorpe, almost as a way of saying, oh, no, I didn't do it because they're gay. I did it because it was a rhetorical point, which the judge also saw through. So that was quite satisfying. It was very satisfying for the judge to basically see through all of his attempts to diminish and minimize what he'd done.
I mean, I do think it's quite interesting. He's emblematic. He's been emblematic of this kind of so-called anti-woke right-wing movement, which, for example, is obviously, kind of defining itself against the claims, whether it be of Black Lives Matter or of for example, trans rights, or, kind of the flag of the LGBTQ movement, obviously Pride and all the rest of it. But it's that victimhood, which he dresses, the garbs of victimhood, which I kind of think is so representative of that particular form of movement. So when, the judge cites his photo in blackface, his use of the N-word, his turning of the Progress Pride as a swastika, as some notable example of the harm he has caused to his own public image. I mean, I just think that's so emblematic, which is basically this form of, kind of straight white men who of right-wing political bent, who try and present themselves as marginalized and victimized. But actually the damage he's done is to himself. That's not, it's not a big conspiracy against him, but that's how they portray it, isn't it? But this is an example of, this is someone who just went through a spiral of self-destruction.
Absolutely. And he hasn't stopped. He's doubling down today. He's saying he didn't lose, he actually won. Do you remember that meme of Katie Hopkins where she's painted a bullseye on her forehead? And she says, this is what it feels like to be a conservative white woman. And someone says, this is actually a really great point because you painted that on yourself. And this is exactly what he's done. He's done a host of deliberately inflammatory, incendiary things that I think are outright racist. And then when people criticize him for it, he says he's being canceled. It's like, he's actually the worst proponent for free speech ever, because he can't handle the consequences of his own free speech. He wishes he had free speech without consequence, and that's not the world that we live in. And the judge was really at pains to make it clear that this is all this is all stuff that he did himself, and that nothing that, in no way by us calling him a racist could we have done any reputational harm to him, because he'd already done it to himself over and over and over. And a lot of the substance of the trial was showing all of the examples where he'd been called a racist prior to us doing it, and all of the examples of how he'd said his career was over before we said anything. You know, this is all stuff that was happening to him well before we got to this point. One great example is him talking about setting up the Reclaim Party and how he's getting a lot of flack on Twitter, but he's also getting a lot of money for this game. And it's an outright admission that he was asked on the stand, he's getting paid £250,000 a year by the Reclaim Party and its mysterious benefactors to be this right-wing demagogue and to just say horrible things and to whip up right-wing agitation. So he knows what he's doing, and he wants to pretend that he's suffering some kind of harm as a result.
I mean, I think in terms of this whole argument about free speech, for example, which the hard right have tried to redefine as we can say what we like, however inflammatory, about marginalized minorities, but if there's any response to that, if we suffer any consequences, that's an attack on free speech. But that's not how free speech works, is it?
Exactly. And I mean, Mr. Free Speech sued people for calling him a racist, for having an opinion that he was a racist.
Exactly, yeah.
I can't think of anything more counter to free speech than trying to silence people who are criticizing you.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I mean. That's the point, wasn't it? It's the hypocrisy of this all the way through, which is, I mean, in terms of what free speech actually means, because actually he was trying to attack your right to say what you actually thought, and it turned out what you said wasn't defamatory. That's now been proven to be correct.
And I keep flip-flopping about whether or not this man is an idiot or if he's doing this incredibly, if this is a calculated move and he knows it's just a way to push buttons and get people outraged on his behalf and potentially get votes or shift the dial politically. But it's just yes, as you say, the hypocrisy of these people, it's really staggering.
And just finally, I mean, in terms of what this represents more broadly, because I think this was an attempt by someone who's very emblematic of this brand of aggressive right-wing politics, who said things which are, I guess, again, in the context of saying that against gay men, obviously deeply damaging and all the rest of it. But he's someone who sums this movement up. And do you not think this is actually quite a big victory in terms of that form of politics, which actually just behaves, throws its weight around? And often people feel quite intimidated by this form of politics, particularly those from minorities which suffer oppression. So this is actually, I think, quite a very important victory, not just about Laurence Fox, but actually broader than that.
Yes, well, he's currently suing someone else for calling him a racist. So hopefully this goes a long way towards solving that problem for Mukhtar. And I really hope it reminds people of the limits on free speech when it comes to making defamatory accusations about people. The judge was very clear also that if he had said, you disagree with what I'm saying and think that I'm a racist, you shouldn't say that. It would be as bad as me calling you a pedophile. That if he had said it that way, there would have been no case. But because he just called me a pedophile with no context, explanation, it was read as an allegation of fact, and that has consequences because people believed it. He has 500,000 followers on Twitter. People saw that and believed it. So yes, I do think that hopefully it reminds people that there are limits on, that free speech can have consequences. The only thing that I find a little bit disappointing is that in terms of our judgment in his counterclaim, it was that we didn't cause him serious harm by calling him a racist. But there was no determination on whether or not he is a racist, whether or not it's a statement of opinion to call someone a racist, which is another way it would not non-defamatory. So we kind of got over the first hurdle, and then we didn't go into any of the further detail, which is a bit of a shame because it would have been nice to also have a line drawn in the sand that says when someone is saying and doing racist things, you can call them a racist without fear of retaliation. In this case, the only reason that the judgment went our way is because he'd already done so many things that people thought were racist that the judge couldn't possibly see how our piece in it was significant. So that's a bit of a shame, but I'm still, very, very happy that we got the outcome that we did.
It's a huge victory, as I said, and I guess lots of people are not exactly devastated to see this happen to someone like Laurence Fox. But as I said, I think there's the really broader important point about this form of aggressive right-wing politics, which is so triumphalist often and thinks basically it can get away with anything. Turns out it can't. So, Christel, massive congrats to you and the others as well. Please like and subscribe. Do share this video. But thank you, Christel.
You're all wondering about where you can get my gorgeous Crystal will Sue You Now t-shirt. Just visit my Instagram page.
Oh, great. I will definitely be getting one of those. Okay, do go to Christel's Instagram page and get one of those. Excellent stuff. Cheers, Christel.